as everyone knows, I took a weasel familiar
Jeremy.
just so I could name him Ron Weasley Jeremy.
Yeah, sure. We good reason.
Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels and short stories. With me is Sam West, and today we're talking about the spell Find Familiar.
Uh-huh. It's a little squirrel, and he jumps on my shoulders, and I can close my eyes and see through his eyes. And that's like 95% what the spell does. It's sweet.
That and good berries.
Exactly. Those are the two big perks. Find familiar. There's a lot of perks. Find familiar.
Yeah.
This is a long one, team. Buckle in. So this is a first level spell for wizards, and there's a lot of other ways to get this, namely the ritual caster feat. Sometimes warlocks can take a pact that gets it. So this is a fairly accessible spell. It's got a cast time of an hour. It's got a ritual tag. Most of this is gonna be like not useful because the spell functions in a very independently unique way. It's got a range of 10 foot. Rose medical material components. The material component is 10 gold pieces worth of charcoal, incense, and herbs that must be consumed by a fire brass brazier. Duration is instantaneous. School is conjuration. You gain the service of a familiar, a spirit that takes an animal form you choose. A bat, a cat, a crab, a frog, which is a toad, a hawk, a lizard, an octopus, an owl, a poisonous snake, a quipper, which is a fish, a rat, a raven, a seahorse, a spider, weasel, and that's all. That's the whole list. Appearing in an unoccupied space within range, the familiar has the statistics of the chosen form, though it is a celestial fey or fiend your choice instead of a beast. This just means beast-related spells don't work on it. Your familiar acts independently of you, but always obeys your commands. In combat, it rolls its own initiative and acts on its own turn. A familiar can't attack, but can take other actions as normal. Good so far. When the familiar drops to 0 hit points, it disappears, leaving behind no physical form. It reappears after you cast the spell again. As an action, you can temporarily dismiss the familiar to a pocket dimension. Alternatively, you can dismiss it forever. As an action, while it is temporarily dismissed, you can cause it to reappear in an unoccupied space within 30 feet of you. Whenever the familiar drops to 0 hit points or disappears into the pocket dimension, it leaves behind in its space anything it was wearing or carrying. When your familiar is within 100 feet of you, you can communicate with it telepathically. Additionally, as an action, you can see through your familiar's eyes and hear what it hears until the start of your next turn, gaining the benefits of any special senses that your familiar has. During this time, you are deaf and blind in regard to your own senses. You can't have more than one familiar at a time. If you cast the spell, you already have a familiar, you instead cause it to adopt a new form. Choose one of the forms from the above list. Your familiar transforms into the chosen creature. Finally, when you cast the spell with range of touch, your familiar can deliver the spell as if it had cast the spell. Your familiar must be within 100 feet of you, and it must use its reaction to deliver the spell whenever you cast it. If the spell requires an attack roll, you use your attack modifier for the roll.
Okay. That's a lot.
It is a lot. The gist of this is you'll spend an hour and 10 minutes and some gold pieces to gain the service of a familiar. Every time your familiar dies, you need to pay that gold cost again and do that hour and 10 long minute ritual to get it back. It can be an hour if you have a spare spell slot, but it's never costs a spell slot because it's a ritual spell if you spend the extra 10 minutes on it. Notably, the dismissing it and summoning from pocket dimension doesn't require any spell slots or doesn't require you casting a spell or anything like that. It's just a thing you can do. And it's a really easy way to keep your familiar safe. It's a really easy way to get your familiar out of danger because you can just be like, oh, crap, it's in danger. Actually dismiss my familiar. Then I don't have to spend the gold to resummon it or anything like that. This thing...
See, this is one of my problems with it.
Mhm.
I don't care about 10 gold.
Yeah, most people don't.
Or an hour. Like I'll get it back at some point. I griped about this with was it Phantom Steed? Fine Steed? Like I just want a horse. Just give me a horse. I don't need a fey spirit that looks like a horse. Same here. I just want a little rat. I don't want a fey spirit. I don't want to, I want something that I'm going to miss if it dies. You know, like in editions past, your familiar dying was a big deal. You were emotionally wrecked. You couldn't summon another one for like a year or something. It was a big deal, and I like those stakes.
I agree that they siphoned a lot of the drama out of familiars. They siphoned a lot of like I as a player, when I have a fine familiar, I am perfectly fine throwing it into a meat grinder, right? Like if
Yeah,
there's
see,
a
that's
dark
what
tunnel
I
full
mean.
of traps,
I
I
am
go,
too, but I don't want to be.
Yeah, I'm just gonna spend the 10 gold and throw it down there and see what happens to the Raven before any of us go through it, right? And like, there's a minor cost to that. The minor cost you lose the abilities of the familiar grants, which are notably very useful, right? We'll touch on
Yeah.
those in a second. But I do 100% agree. Like, it doesn't need to be this easy to get back. They could have made it. I think the spell honestly doesn't deserve to be a spell, and it kind of deserves to be a wizard and warlock feature that you could have longer kind of consequences for, right? Like, you get the service of
Mhm.
a familiar. That familiar you have to take care of, you have to protect it. It's harder to get back. You need like at least some amount of time, 24 hours or something, to be able to conjure a new one. There needed
And
to be,
some kind of I don't know, I just want some kind of penalty for not being with it. Like if it dies, you have disadvantage on whatever until 24 hours passes. You summon a new one or something.
I mean, this
Like,
edition's not really in the business of doing those kind of penalties because they found players really hate them, and I do
oh,
agree. I do agree that like any kind of if you add negative text to an ability, it just discourages people from using that ability altogether, right? So like if you put text that would say if your familiar dies, you get a horrible migraine for a week and have disadvantage on intelligence checks. Even if that doesn't come up, people still are gonna steer clear of those kinds of risks just because of how generally unfun it feels, right? Especially if something
yeah,
happens to your familiar that's out of your control. And you just go, well, now I suffer all this negative text for no freaking good reason. This edition worked very hard to remove a lot of that from the game, which makes features like the Berserker's Berserk ability really. I don't know why those got printed, but the downsides to Find Familiar didn't. But
yeah.
here we are.
That's my 2 cents.
That's fair. For what the spell is now, though, it is a bananas powerful spell. I would rate this
Oh
as
yeah,
one of, if not the most powerful spell in the game for its level, namely because the cost is ungodly low. If you can put this on your sheet, you probably should. It is super fun. Having a little pet makes a lot of people very happy. I advocate that as opposed to having it roll initiative, just have it act after your turn. And the reason I advocate for that is tracking. It is kind of miserable to be like in the middle of combat. Oh, we forgot my familiar's turn 2 turns ago. We have to go back and make sure I can do the minute actions I wanted to take with it there. It's just a lot of extra hassle. I would highly recommend, and they changed the summon spells to work this way. Just take it at the end of the player's turn that has it. It's way simpler, easier to manage, less rolling. The initiative tracker gets less dense. It's a worthy adjustment to make, I think, for the spell as a homebrew fix I would give for it. I would imagine in the next edition we're going to see that exact change get made to this spell, but we don't know yet. So
yeah. All right. What else?
what does it do?
Yeah.
We've not touched on really what it does, but it does a lot of things. Familiars are really, really useful. So like what's in the spell description tells you can like look through its senses, and that makes them very good at scouting. Because all of these forms tend to be at the minimum easy to have be inconspicuous, right? I like rats a lot because they blend well into a lot of classic medieval fantasy settings as just vermin. So people aren't often caught off guard when they see one. So you can just have it be a fantastic little scout. You can have it sneak around. They have a 20-foot speed. They can scurry along the ground. You can see through its senses. It's all great and handy like that. Weasels similarly fit a similar bill as far as like a little ground thing that can scurry about. They're not the fastest things in the world. Weasels are slightly faster, but they also get a +5 to stealth over rats. So usually they're going to be a strict upgrade over rats if you're considering going for either of the like ground-based familiars. But then like the actual really, really powerful ones are like bats, hawks, ravens. All of these have flight speeds. And getting a flight speed on a familiar is so unbelievably useful. You can send them over distances carrying small things. They can carry small amounts of weight for you, including ends of rope. You can send them out to up large distances. Again, like I alluded to before, you can send them down tunnels to check for traps. They are fantastic little recyclable tools. Now, if you're willing to spend 10 gold, the risk is usually pretty low, and they can carry an interface in a large space in a very dynamic way. They're kind of like, I would say flying familiars are almost like an upgraded version of a mage hand, where you can have them flying around at really no cost to you using spells or anything. It doesn't even cost you a known cantrip, it just costs you a spell in your spellbook most of the time as a wizard. You'll just have this little ability flying around interfacing with all kinds of objects, pulling dangerous levers, poking their heads into holes that you don't want to stick your hand into, right? They are incredibly useful for dungeon crawling, and even more so in just having an extra entity to steal people's mail, follow someone in the streets, all of these things. They're great for all of it.
Like a mage hand and an arcane eye all in one.
Oh yeah, 100 feet is really, really large. So like as long as you can stay within that of your familiar, you can kind of like relay it so it can follow 100 feet behind something else, and then you just keep making sure you're keeping pace with it, and you got a 200-foot window to track somebody. Very, very useful.
The little pocket dimension is cool as well because
Oh,
if you get if you get like captured and thrown in a cell and they don't know you have a familiar, then yeah, pop them out of the pocket dimension and go find me some keys.
Yeah. Another useful thing to know, it doesn't care what distance your familiar is away from you before you can dismiss it to a pocket dimension, then resummon it to you, right? So if you're familiar, if you send it on to do something, and that thing might be hundreds of feet away, miles away even, right? Whenever you need it back, you can just snap your fingers twice, and over 2 rounds, it's there. Doesn't matter how far away it was from you, you can immediately summon it back to you, which is really, really handy for long-term duration, large gaming kind of planning stuff, right? And it can even convey to you information from over those long distances in sort of a one-way communication path, right? Like, it can get that information, it can be surveying an area, and whenever you need it back to you, you summon it back and go, okay, give me the rundown, what did you see over the time that you were there, and then you can continue moving on with your life.
Now, does the pocket dimension, there was some text in there. There's so much text.
This spell is robust.
Yes. What was the thing that it drops everything it was carrying? Is that the pocket dimension?
Yes, it can't bring anything with it into the pocket dimension, so you can't use it for storage or anything like that.
Well, not storage. I was thinking more like instantaneous transport.
No, not quite.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's good enough as is.
Oh, I think absolutely.
I really can't undersell just how insanely cheap this thing is, right? So wizards, again, being ritual casters, they don't even have to prepare ritual spells to use them. So if you are a wizard and you are starting out the game at level 1, you can prepare a number of spells equal to your int mod plus your level, right? So you're going to start with normally 4 prepared spells. The rest of the spells in your spell book should be rituals, because then you can use all of those spells without ever expending spell slots on them, and you never have to prepare them either. They're just there, which gives you a whopping total of 8 starting spells compared to everyone else in the game that normally gets 1, 2, 3 kind of spells or less, right? So you have 8 resources at your disposal. Ritual spells normally take 10 minutes to cast. Find Familiar is something you do over a rest. Find Familiar is say, okay, I need an extra hour whenever we start this long rest, and then you'll just have this passive ability for the rest of your life. And whenever you can add that kind of power for no real in-game cost to your sheet, it's worth doing. 10 gold is a steal to have a permanent extra buddy at your disposal that can deliver good berries in combat, that can take potions to people in combat, that can do a whole bunch of useful utility actions in combat. It can't take the attack action, sure, and yes, it can deliver touch spells, which is not... I don't find that to be particularly relevant text most of the time, because it's still costing your action, still costing its reaction. It can kind of extend the range of some things, but that's not the meat of it, I don't think. I think the meat of it is it takes the help action, right? It bobs and weaves near your fighter to distract something within 5 feet of it and gives it advantage on attack roll for free. Maybe it costs you 10 gold down the road if the familiar takes a hit, but then it also took a hit for you in a fight. And that's also kind of just like spending 10 gold to eat an attack roll. That's a fantastic deal that almost every low tier party is happy to take. Familiars are really, really useful in combat too.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the touch action delivering spells might be a little bit better than you're giving it credit for. I've seen it used in interesting ways sometimes.
Such as?
Yes, I knew you were going to ask me, and nothing's coming to mind, but I remember it happening.
It did happen.
Yes.
Fantastic. Maybe we should have a larger piece talking about every touch spell in the game, and going through what ones are worth doing.
Ooh, what about Vampiric Touch?
Iconically powerful spell, yes.
I'm just saying that takes away like one of the worst parts of it.
Yeah, but like, you don't need the hit points then. And also, I don't think this, like, Vampiric Touch is range of self, I think, and then you touch things with it gives you a new action. I don't think you can use the touch ability of the spell through the familiar. I do not believe that works. Let me double check.
I'm double checking too,
because
it's still gonna suck.
Range. Got him.
Oh, no, you're right. Touch. Range of self.
Yeah, so it doesn't work with it at all.
All right, Vampiric Touch still just as much as it ever has. Oh, tragic.
A lot of the touch spells that you kind of care about are like maybe you Shocking Grasp with it over a distance. Do you care about Shocking Grasping with it? I don't really think so. It's a cantrip. Cure Wounds would be one you could consider doing if, again, you had access to Cure Wounds with a character that had Find Familiar, and I definitely could find, like, if I'm playing a Cleric, I want it on my sheet too. So, like, if I'm taking Ritual Caster, if I'm taking 2 levels or 3 levels in Warlock, taking a level in Wizard, if I'm like an Arcana Domain or something, I can definitely see that being a play pattern that makes Cure Wounds a slightly better version of Healing Word sometimes, but it still costs you your action, so it's still not that great. Yeah, like, as far as touch spells go, I don't find a lot of them are particularly powerful. That's to say, commenters down below, let me know what I'm not thinking of. I'm sure there are touch spells that you're happy to cast with this thing, or tell us your stories. When did you have a familiar deliver a touch spell, and it was utterly devastating?
Yeah, all right. What else
There
we
are
got?
some neat little things we can touch on for the individual familiars. They all have like their unique abilities. While none of them can attack, their other stats are kind of interesting. So like ravens, for example, have a mimicry ability, and mimicry lets them mimic similar sounds they hear, which gives them a little bit more extra juice compared to the other options, right? Like I mentioned, weasels have a +5 to stealth check. This is sort of what ravens get on top of their 50-foot fly speeds, which is so freaking fast. 50 feet is so fast. Poisonous snakes have blind sight out to 10 feet, which can be really handy because you can use its senses to detect individual creatures, detect illusions and stuff like that. Because again, blind sight doesn't use vision. It senses things within space, which can be a little
Yeah.
cool ability to have if you want. Blind sight on your character sheet, that is a way to get it. So that's kind of neat. Owls have 120-foot dark vision. 120-foot dark vision if you're looking for it. That can be pretty meaningful. I don't hate that one bit. Frogs are kind of useless. They have a 20-foot swim speed. And they can jump large distances, but like they're probably the worst option you can get here. If I'm gonna be honest, frogs really, really suck. And if you're
How big a distance can a frog jump to where it's gonna matter for you?
the long jump is 10 feet and its high jump is 5 feet.
Okay, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to anyone else. Whenever you could
No.
just have an owl or a raven or
Yeah.
something with a flight speed, right? Like, yeah, frogs are pretty bad, but they are cute. So if you like the cute look, so they'll
Yeah.
still be fine. They're still gonna be a familiar, and that's just gonna have value.
Well, they're toads, and those are less cute.
It could be either. It's frog or toad.
All right.
Lizards also suck. They have a 20-foot climb speed though, so that's like better than frogs probably.
Now, they have their own things, but they don't convey this to you, do they?
So when you use
Like, except for the
while your
blind
familiars,
sight and stuff.
you can see through your familiar's eyes and hear what it
Right.
hears until the start of your deck turn, gaining the benefits of any special senses the familiar has. So yes, you do gain
Yeah.
those benefits. And I
But
just
not
noticed,
like jumps and fly speeds and stuff.
I mean, you personally don't gain those things, but
Right.
you use
That's
the
what I'm saying.
senses of the familiar. So
Yeah.
the senses of the familiars matter more. I didn't mention bats. Bats have keen hearing, so they have advantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on hearing. They have echolocation, so they can't use blind sight while they're deafened, so that's notable. But they have a 60-foot blind sight. 60 feet of blind sight is enormous, making them really useful tools on top of their 30-foot fly speed, which is pretty excellent as well. Yeah, bats seem really, really good. You should take bat familiars more often. I didn't think to do that recently, and I probably should have. I've been too busy enjoying my octopus familiar because Simon the octopus is just he is love, he is life. He dies a lot, but that's okay because they're back for 10 gold pieces. They get ink cloud, which makes a big little cloud of ink. They get underwater camouflage, give advantage on stealth checks underwater with a +4 stealth check. That's pretty sweet. They have hold breath, so they can stay out underwater for 30 minutes. They do a lot of cool little stuff. I love octopi. Octopuses?
And
I think it's octopuses.
as everyone knows, I took a weasel familiar
Jeremy.
just so I could name him Ron Weasley Jeremy.
Yeah. Sure. For good reason. Yeah, this spell's it may not sound really cracked the way that we're talking about it. You have to remember all of this doesn't cost you a damn thing, right?
Yeah. Well,
all
10,
of this
10
is
gold worth of charcoal or something.
yeah, it's so close to functionally free, it really doesn't matter. So like if you can get this on your character sheet, you should. Even if you don't have ritual casting, because you'll just spend a first level spell slot, last long rest, and then you'll have it forever. So like they're disgustingly yucky good. It also be doing it a disservice to quickly mention that Pact of the Chain gives you 3 upgraded familiars that are all baller, and there are lots of ways in this game to get cute little other familiars. So like there's a thing called a gazer. It's a little beholder that you can bind as service as a familiar, and that'll use the material and statistics to find familiar if you can find that in the game. There are other little things like I think you can get miniature holy fence in some settings. A bunch of books have little variant familiars that you can get that are just familiars but better because they have way better stat blocks. So yeah, keep on the lookout for those if you want to get a cooler familiar than one of these animals that's technically a celestial fae or or fiend. But you know, for the most part, the base list is still excellent. There's still plenty of cool things to do. Spiders are great. All of them are great. The floor being a frog is a lowish floor comparatively, but it's still an extra ally that you have sneaking around, that you have looking through its senses, that you can have do all kinds of world interactive things that will matter to you. So if you can get that on your sheet, you should get it on your sheet. It does change the game. Your DM has to account for it. It's an extra member of the party. There's going to be so many things that these things can do that your fighter wishes they could do. Like have a 60-foot fly or 50-foot fly speed that can interact in 3D space is just something that your character now fully has access to over huge distances. And it's going to be powerful. This is a 5 out of 5, truly a banger of a first level spell.
Yeah, no argument here. 5 out of 5. And I'm sure, like, it's limited by your imagination. There are so many things we haven't touched on here
There's
because
no
it
way
would be
we possibly
impossible
could.
to cover everything. Yes,
Yeah.
Find familiar. All right. All right. Well, that was Find Familiar. Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us. Let us know your little cute familiar stories in the comments, and what else? What did we specifically ask them before?
Touch spells.
Touch spells. Yeah. Let us know what touch spells you use with these. Yeah. Good times. Like, subscribe. Goodbye.